Hello, and welcome back. I'm going to continue reading Chapter 1 of Winky and Wonder. Wonder and Winky were sitting on a lamp in the living room nearby. Wonder, Jody's getting ready to leave. I think she should stay a while and talk to Mrs. Thorson. Quick, Winky, take out your mirror and reflect the light from the sun onto that photograph over there, Wonder said, pointing to a framed photo of a kind-looking gentleman. Winky pulled the mirror out of his pocket and did as Wonder suggested. The light from the sun bounced off the mirror and created a glare on the glass in the picture frame. The sudden flash of light it created caused Jody to squint, and then she noticed the framed photograph. "Who is that nice-looking man?" inquired Jody. "That is my husband." Mrs. Thorson looked at the photo longingly. "He died 3 years ago. I miss him very much." "Shouldn't you be over him by now?" said Jody thoughtlessly. "I mean, older people are expected to die. At least he lived a long time." Mrs. Thorson raised her eyebrows. "Do you have a grandfather?" she asked. "Oh, yes," Jody's eyes shone. "He's wonderful. He always listens to me when I have a problem. He takes me to all kinds of interesting places." Mrs. Thorson smiled kindly and asked, "Is your grandfather old?" "Yes," replied Jody hesitantly. "So, since he is an old man and he has lived a good life, it wouldn't bother you very much if he died tomorrow?" "Oh, that would be terrible." "And how long would you be allowed to miss him before you got over him?" "Would you stop missing him after 3 years?" Jody was feeling very foolish. With downcast eyes, she replied, "Oh, no, I'd miss him forever." "And would you remember him and think about the times you spent together?" Mrs. Thorson prompted gently. "Always. That is how we keep our loved ones that have died with us, by remembering them and by doing things that we know would make them happy." Jody looked up at Mrs. Thorson. "But if it makes you happy to remember him, how come you act so scary?" "Scary? I heard you yell at that boy today who almost knocked you over, and then you yelled at me when I tried to help you with the groceries," explained Jody. Mrs. Thorson sighed. "I must apologize for that. Sometimes my body aches so much I lose patience with the world, and I feel afraid." "Why does your body hurt?" "I have arthritis. It is quite painful for me to even turn a doorknob." "My mom has a condition that sounds similar to yours." "Oh?" "Yes, she got it from working on a computer. It's called a repetitive stress injury." "Does your mother ever act scary, like I do?" asked Mrs. Thorson, winking. "When she answers me with a sharp voice, I can tell her arms are hurting. But then I'll ask her if her arms are bothering her, and that seems to relax her somehow. She says she doesn't feel as alone with her pain when others acknowledge how she feels." Mrs. Thorson leaned back in her chair and sighed again. "I suppose that's why I act scary sometimes, even though I don't intend to. I become frustrated when I'm unable to do the things I used to do. It's difficult to be 25 years old in an 85-year-old body." "Is that what it feels like to be old, Mrs. Thorson?" "Well, not for all elderly people, but it is like that for quite a few of us." "I have an idea," said Jody excitedly. "Since it helps my mom when I acknowledge that she's in pain, maybe I can help you when you're acting grouchy and scaring children." "How would you help me?" asked Mrs. Thorson, furrowing her eyebrows. "Well, perhaps I could say a code word or sentence that means, 'I know you're having a bad day, but your actions are frightening or upsetting someone.'" "That's a good idea, Jody. I'd like you to help me with that. I certainly don't want to be frightening children. What kind of code should we use?" "What was your husband's first name?" "His name was Lars." How about Lars riding on a star?" Mrs. Thorson felt confused, and she repeated back, "Lars riding on a star? I don't understand." Jody smiled and explained, "You see, Lars is in the heavens now with the stars. And so when I say Lars riding on a star, it means Lars is watching you from up above, and he cares about your pain." "Oh, Jody, you're such a smart girl. I think that's a wonderful code. Thinking about Lars will certainly help me relax and be better able to deal with my pain." "Mrs. Thorson, would it be all right if I tell my friends about your arthritis?" "Yes, but please don't make it sound like an excuse for me to behave inappropriately. I never intended to scare anyone, and I'm glad you brought it to my attention. I've learned a lot from you today, Jody." "And I don't think you're scary anymore, Mrs. Thorson. May I visit you again soon?" Mrs. Thorson slowly rose from her chair and gave Jody a warm hug. "I'd be delighted to see you again, Jody." Wonder and Winky floated out of Mrs. Thorson's house on the joy and warmth surrounding Jody. "Jody learned something important today," said Winky. "Yes," answered Wonder. "She learned about empathy, which means identifying with what someone else is feeling." Jody had difficulty relating to how much Mrs. Thorson missed Mr. Thorson, until Jody imagined how painful it would be if her own grandfather died. Jody already had empathy for her own mother's physical pain because she was aware of her mother's condition. But often we don't know what kind of emotional or physical pain someone else is experiencing. And sometimes it's worth it to find out more about the person. "I'm glad we were able to help Jody and Mrs. Thorson," said Winky. "If Jody hadn't listened to her heart, they never would have had this special and important conversation." Mrs. Thorson learned something today, too. She learned that she needs to pay attention to how she treats others, even though her arthritis causes her pain and her loneliness makes her sad. That's true, and she found out it's never too late to learn new ways or to make new friends. Jody began walking up the front stairs of her home, and Winky and Wonder had to disengage themselves from floating on Jody's joy. "I wish we could float on Jody's joy a while longer," said Wonder, "but it's time for us to head back to Whisperland." "Yes," replied Winky, as they both caught the wing of an evening sparrow passing by. "Grandmother and Grandfather Whisper have another lesson to teach us." Then the evening sparrow spoke. "I have an urgent message for you from your grandparents. They said all beings are in grave danger and need your help. You must come home quickly for a special lesson to prepare you to defend others from this insidious danger." "We'd better hurry then," cried Wonder, and off they flew to Whisperland. And that concludes Chapter 1. Soon I'll start recording Chapter 2 to share with you. And children may want to think about this part of the story, what was going on, about how sometimes we don't know what someone else is experiencing in their life. And they might seem grumpy, they might seem like they don't like us. We wonder what we did wrong, and it turned out maybe we didn't do anything wrong at all. Maybe they're just struggling with something that's so big that they're kind of letting it out on others, which they should not do. It's not an excuse. But sometimes if you give them a smile and maybe just talk to them for a few minutes, you might be able to help them relax, and maybe it'll turn things around. You can try it, see what happens. I'll see you again soon.